Welcome back to Real Estate Simplified. Kayla, election season is almost here. I've already had people knock on my door and try and get my vote for the upcoming stuff. But housing is a huge topic. We're hearing a lot of talk at both the provincial and federal level about housing. We've got a conservative leadership race, and that's going to be a really big topic. What is making housing such a big election topic?
I think it always is. It always is. They have a lot of promises that they're giving out through their campaigns, trying to promise what they're going to do to address the housing crisis, but nothing really gets accomplished where it's addressing the housing crisis in itself. So I think this year we do have to really pay attention to what each elected official is promising you, and is it worth it? Because there is more changes happening from the housing task force that has been created. So that is obviously going to feed the interests of the elected officials that are running.
Yeah, so let's dive deeper, because housing is such an umbrella topic. What are the main issues within that macro housing issue that people should be focusing on?
I think it's about the supply of housing, but you also got to look at the price of housing, right? So you have the price of housing in itself that one-on-one of the home buyer, the first initial home buyer. Then we have to look at housing for renters, because not everyone can be home buyers. And I think that's where they're missing the solutions trying to come out with it, is because they're looking at the developers and what the developers can build. But we have so many different municipal policies that can be changed, or provincial policies that can be changed, to start utilizing the way that investors are creating different type of units regarding secondary suites, or doing even more 3 to 4 units. And again, I think that task force is really starting to narrow in on what is actually required in order for us to get that supply and demand up.
Yeah, and I think another issue at play is nimbyism, not in my backyard, where I think just the general population doesn't want any multi-unit buildings in their neighborhood, or they don't want somebody adding a garden suite in the backyard. But that's what's going to give us that lower price range supply. So what can the government do, or is there a solution to getting neighborhoods on board to actually create those additional units and create that supply?
Definitely, I think tiny homes and the garden suites are definitely a part of everyone's idea of creating the affordability, the supply that is needed. But deep down, we have to get more into what tiny homes and garden suites are going to accomplish. Are they going to get created in areas where it's going to be a long-term, a short-term accommodation, or are they being used for people who are living in a big home who want to downsize, but the market is not making sense for them to downsize, so they're going to create those tiny homes in order for them to downsize in. So are they really going to create that affordability that we're looking for, especially with the supply? And what you have to consider is that look at your overall where these tiny homes could be pushed. So if you have a older area, can the infrastructure handle this type of extra diversity with the people moving in to get tiny homes?
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned the market doesn't make sense for some people to make a move. In the current market, as it is, are you finding that more landlords are actually getting out of real estate ownership these days?
Yes, I hear a lot from our realtors, I hear a lot from our paralegals. The number one application form is usually that N12, so taking it over for their own personal use. Our realtors are now looking into different social media groups, trying to get some advice on how to evict a tenant based on the home being sold to an owner who does want to move into the place. And they're going to do that for multiple reasons. One, we've seen what the pandemic has taught us, is that obviously the government can do one flick of a pen, and now tenants are being told that, pay your food bill before you pay your rent. And that's obviously gotten a lot of landlords concerned. Now with inflation and the price of gas, obviously that's going to hit tenants first. And so a lot of landlords and investors are very nervous on holding on to the market of their rentals, especially if they have single family homes or townhouses, and those properties are going to be sold to first-time home buyers, or just people who are looking to just relocate.
Yeah, and going on along that vein with some challenges landlords are facing, we also have rent control in Ontario, which is always a hot topic for me. I could go on for hours about rent control. How does that play into the long-term sustainability for rental property ownership?
I think that's where a lot of landlords now try to offload their properties and try to scale. So they get rid of the smaller ones to get a bigger one at that time because of the way that they can only raise their rent to the 1.2% this year. Obviously with utility rates that are increasing for hydro, gas, and water, and then you have your property taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, and just the overall risk of your tenants not paying rent or potentially bringing you to the landlord and tenant board. There's so many more risk factors in play that they're like, do we really want to hold on to this property, or do we want to scale, or do we want to pull out of Ontario and get into other provinces that A, are investor friendly, or B, there's a boom that's going to be happening based on the jobs that are going to be created there, and let's get in now.
Yeah, and you just look at inflation. 1.2% doesn't even come close to keeping a pace, depending on which month we're looking at. We could be 4%, we could be 6%, even in the US pushing 7%. So 1.2% increase over a 12-month period is not very much.
Especially when you look at what you got to pay for a light bulb these days. Yeah. So the increase that you're able to get, it's not even practical. So that's why the landlords do have to look at the way that they're running their rental business as a business and know that the numbers need to make sense for our investors to continue to want to create more supply within our province. Yeah,
100%. So going back to the election, what sort of plans or strategies would you like to see politicians talking about? Like what need is there in your eyes?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? So right away, you got to look at what our provincial government can do, what our municipal government can do. Obviously, the provincial government is going to have a big say on what happens with the rules and procedures with the Residential and Tenancy Act, and that needs to be reviewed. An overhaul needs to happen in order to give the Landlord and Tenant Board the proper structure in order to implement those rules into the Landlord and Tenant Board to make it more streamlined approach and make it fair to both parties. Obviously, they have to look at what kind of initiatives can we improve within our policies in order to get more investors into the industry and also keep them into the industry. So they do have to look at the rent increases that are allowed. They also have to look at different programs that are available to tenants to help them in their time of need. So it's not going to be a landlord world and only listen to the landlords. We have to take into consideration what is happening to our tenants and how it's affecting them, but they also have to make sure that the landlords are protected and that the development of fees and the procedure of creating secondary suites are not so crazy, and it should be right across the board. Each city has their own way of allowing secondary suites and different requirements. I think they need to really make things more transparent as a province, so to speak, so it's not so crazy and hard for someone just to put in a secondary suite, because hey, we need as many units as we possibly can get. They shouldn't be picking and choosing.
Yeah, we could be building for the next 10 years and we would still have a unit deficit. So that's how big the issue is, and hopefully the red tape lessens a little bit and landlords can actually enjoy some of the benefits, cash flow, some better cash flow, some better stability, but tenants also end up with a better product and some more affordable housing. So that's great. Thanks, Kayla.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking about tips and tricks for landlords and tenants. Stay tuned.